Good morning, everyone. I'm Reverend Kathy Howell. I'm the chaplain here at the Hermitage. And this is called Breeze Time with Kathy, and I thank you for joining me. Of course, I have 2 days, Tuesday and Thursday at 9 o'clock. I do talks like this, just sort of informal chats. And I think on Thursday it's called Coffee with Kathy. But anyway, I do want to apologize. My worship service on Sunday did not air due to technical difficulties. However, it will be rebroadcast on Wednesday, tomorrow, at 11 a.m. So we hope that that problem has been corrected. And I apologize, it has happened a couple of times in the past too. And Mary King and is well aware of it, and so is Chris, and they're working to find a permanent solution to this. But today I thought I'd tell you about the first time that I went to the Holy Land. Now, my husband Chuck and I had traveled in my junior year of seminary, my third year of seminary, it took me 5 years, by the way, to go through seminary because I was only going part-time. Most of the time it takes 3 years going year-round, but it took me 5. But anyway, in my third year of seminary, my New Testament professor, Dr. Ben Witherington, Chuck and I took a trip with him to Italy and Greece, which I'll have to share more about sometime. But it was really a wonderful, powerful experience. We learned so much and we saw so much, and neither one of us had ever traveled to Europe before. I'd never traveled. I'd been to Mexico, I think, once, but I'd never traveled out of the country aside from that. So, what happened as far as the Holy Land was we enjoyed that trip so much to Israel, to Greece and Italy, and that trip was called Early Christianity in the Footsteps of Paul, that we both said if he ever goes to the Holy Land, we want to go with him. Well, lo and behold, the year or so after I graduated from seminary, Dr. Witherington announced he was going to do a tour to the Holy Land. Well, I was a widow now, and I decided I was going to go with him, even though I was going to go travel by myself. After all, I'd be with the group, and I knew what the experience of traveling with a group tour was like, so I felt very good about it. I was so excited. I had planned everything down to the letter, and I had planned lots of time. I was going to have to fly from the little regional airport near where my churches were, and then I'd have to fly from Lafayette, Louisiana to Houston, and then from Houston I'd fly to New York, and from New York I'd meet the group, and we'd fly on to Jerusalem, having changed planes in Istanbul. So that was the trip, and I had it all planned down to the minute, practically, on my end of it, about how to get there, and I had allowed lots of time to make my connections. So Michael took me to the airport my son Michael took me to the airport on the morning of the trip, and don't you know, it poured down rain. And because of that, the planes which fly to our regional airport in Lafayette didn't come in. They come in the early morning from Houston and then fly back. And we had no planes. So they decided to put us on a bus and send us to Houston. Well, that was going to take about 2.5 to 3 hours, and but I planned lots of time, so they rebooked my flight in Houston, that I could make a connection that was going to get me to New York on time. And I would still have, even though I'd originally planned 6 hours in New York at the airport to pick up my luggage and find my group and go and get my bags checked, and I had plenty of time before the plane left. Now, the flight they rebooked me on, I was only going to have about, I wasn't going to have a whole lot of time, only about an hour, but it was the last plane out of Houston that was going to get me to New York in time to make my connection with my group. So, when I got to Houston, the bus took so long, I only had about 30 minutes to get to my plane. Well, I looked at the lines, it was chaos. It had rained 18 and a half inches in Houston overnight. All of the planes had been canceled. The airport was packed. The lines were tremendous. And here I looked at my carry-on bag and my check bag, and I looked at those lines to check baggage, and I said, it's never going to happen. I'm not going to make it to my plane. I only have 35 minutes. I've got to get to my plane. So I went straight to security in order to go directly to my gate. And when I got to security, they told me, ma'am, you can't bring that big bag on the plane. And I said, oh, please, and I didn't know much about flying. And they said, you just can't bring it on the plane. And I said, but is there any place I can check it here and leave it? No, you can't do that. Because if you remember long ago, airplane, those blockers they used to have in airports, they were all taken out. Because people used to put bombs in them, I guess, and because of terror security. So that wasn't going to happen. So they said, no, you can't bring it. I said, well, what else can I do with it? He said, well, we could throw it away for you. I said, fine, I want to make this trip. This trip is important to me. So I threw the suitcase open and I pulled out things like my medicine, some extra clothes, anything I thought and my Bible, whatever I thought was essential. And I shoved it all in my carry-on bag, and I said, throw it away, and I ran for my gate. Well, it was all the way, of course, it was probably the furthest gate away, and I ran for it, and I knew I only had about at that point, about 10 to 15 minutes, and I was running, and I ran to the gate, and I got there in time to see the plane back up from the gate and take off. Ugh. Okay, I wasn't going to make it to New York in time to connect with my flight. So I went back to security and, no, can I recover that bag I gave you by any chance? Maybe you haven't actually put it out and sent it. Nope, it's gone. We sent it to the dumpster. And I said, okay. All right, well, so I went and stood in line for a while. They put me on another plane, and I got to New York about 11 o'clock that night. As of yet, I didn't have a flight to. I didn't have a new flight to Jerusalem, but they were going to go ahead and see what they could do to rebook me. There was a possibility I could get on a flight at about 11 o'clock, but more likely I would simply have to wait and fly on Turkish Air, which was the same flight that my group had taken, but by the time I took it, it'd be 24 hours later. And I'd change planes in Istanbul and flying on to Jerusalem. Well, I was in the airport. It's 11:30 at night, and they said, they would help me get a hotel room. I said, okay, a hotel room. So I went ahead. I shouldn't have gotten the hotel room because I couldn't hardly sleep. I went ahead and got the hotel room to a hotel, and while I was there, they confirmed by phone that I wasn't going to be able to do anything. I would have to wait until about 6 o'clock that evening and and catch that flight that would take me to Istanbul overnight, and then on to would take me to Istanbul and then on to Israel, to Jerusalem. Okay, well, I thought I've never been in New York. So I looked at the desk and I asked if there were any tours. Maybe I could just do maybe a 4-hour tour of New York City or something. Just something, and then go straight to the airport. Just something to not absolutely waste the day, because I was really depressed. And no, there wasn't really anything. Except maybe there was a driver. They happened to know a town car driver who did private tours. And I said, how much is that? They told me, and I looked at my money, and I said, okay, yeah, that ought to be enough. So I went ahead and went on this tour. He drove me around Manhattan and then took me to the airport. But while I was driving around Manhattan, unfortunately, I dropped my phone and it broke. Well, now I was in a panic because my phone wasn't just the screen was broken, it was that it was in pieces and it didn't work anymore. And I said, oh my gosh, what am I going to do now? So I ended up that 4 hours when I was supposed to be seeing New York, I instead had to go to the AT&T store and get a new phone, because I needed a phone so that I would be able to receive calls if there were any changes in my flights or any problems with that. Plus, I was already afraid enough traveling alone, much less to not have a phone I could use. How would I connect with the tour group? What would I do? How would I keep in, when I got to Israel? I just was a piece of work. So I ended up spending, of course, I had to pay cash for the phone, and that cost me a small fortune. So here I am. I paid for the hotel. I paid for the little short drive around Manhattan. I paid for the broken phone, and I felt like I was just bleeding money out. Okay. So I decided that when I got to the airport, I would go ahead and use the ATM and get some more cash before I left the States. I was going to do that, right? Well, don't you know that I did get the new phone. I saw a little bit of New York. I saw the Empire State Building, and I went to Battery Park, and it was very pleasant. I went to the airport, and I had to stand in this long line to go through security. I went through security, and I think I skipped something. Okay, so this is what happened. This is in the days of paper tickets. So I had to pick up my ticket. Originally the tour group leader, Dr. Witherington, was going to hold all the tickets, but he left the ticket for me at the Turkish Air desk. So I went to the Turkish Air desk, and I picked up my ticket. It was only like 4 people in line, and I had been standing in lines at airports forever, and I thought, what a break. I don't have to stand in line. And, just 4 people, that's nothing. And I got up there, took my turn, and they went ahead, and they gave me my tickets. I had to pay an extra $100 for the change, more money out, and had to pay an extra $100 for the flight change, because after all, it was an act of God. It wasn't the technical problem that had delayed my flight. It was the rain. So they had charged me $100 to change my ticket. So I paid it. Then, by the way, they were very nice. They later on refunded the $100 to me. After I got home, I had a letter waiting for me telling me they refunded me the $100, because they decided that they were going to do that, which was very twice, but that doesn't matter. That wasn't until I got home. Right then, I had to shell out another $100. So now I really needed that ATM. Well, I walk away from the ticket counter, and I think, well, maybe I'll look for that ATM now. But unfortunately, I saw the line. The line. I said, well, now I just go to the gate, and they said, no, you've got to check in. And the check-in line is around the corner, and I came to look around the corner, and the line went zoom, 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 all the way around, and people had carts with all kinds of suitcases on them, and I said, this is going to take forever. So I said, I got to go to the bathroom. So I went to the bathroom at JFK Airport, and I went ahead, got in line. I stood in line, and actually, when the reason the line was so long was the Turkish check-in desk hadn't opened yet. Turkish Air check-in desk hadn't opened yet. And when it did, it went pretty quickly, and it was only about 30 minutes later or so that I got up to the desk, and I had my, tickets, because I was a paranoid traveler. I had my ticket, my passport, and everything was right here in a pouch that I had around my neck, and of course I could drop it underneath my shirt. And I had it that way, secured, because I was afraid to lose it. And I got up there, and I handed them the packet with my ticket and passport in it, and when they went through it, they said, well, where's your passport? I said, my passport? It's not here. And I went through the papers and no, my passport wasn't there. And I said, I know I had it when I picked up the tickets, because I picked it up at the Turkish Air information desk. And then the only thing I did was go to the bathroom, and I said, oh, the bathroom, maybe I lost it in the bathroom. So it's the only place I could think to check. So I'm heading back to the bathroom at JFK 30 minutes later, and of course there's a long line, but I'm just panicked and in panic mode, and I just cut through, and I said, I think I left something in the bathroom, and I cut through the line, and I cut in front of all these people, and I'm saying to myself, God, I know I have a hard head, but if all these problems have been because you don't want me to travel, to go on this trip, then I accept it. I won't go on this trip. I will accept that it has to be canceled, and I'll just lose my $2,000 plus all this other money I've spent. I'll just live with it. And as I came through the bathroom door, I heard a woman calling from the end stall where I had been, say, is there a Catherine Howell out there? She'd found my passport. So, I just gave thanks to God. I ran and I got the passport from her. I went back. I stood in the line at the Turkish Air check-in desk. I checked in, then I stood in the long line that got me through security. That was about a 25, 30-minute wait. And I went through security, and then now I had time. I'd gotten to the airport plenty of time. I had about 4 hours till my flight left. Well, about 3 hours by this time till my flight left. My bags, all I had was my carry-on bag, so I didn't have to worry about checking anything. And I decided to look for that ATM, because by this time I needed money. I didn't have any cash. Well, I couldn't find one. So I asked. And they told me, well, all the ATMs are outside the security check. So I went outside the security check, and I went back out through security. I found the ATM. My card didn't work. So, why my card didn't work, I wasn't sure. But it didn't really matter. It didn't work. Well, I only had about $20 cash on me at this point. Maybe more. I don't remember. So I asked was there a bank? So sometimes there's banks in airports, little bank branches, but there weren't any at JFK. So instead, they said you could take a cab. There's one right at the airport entrance. A branch of my bank, it turned out to be. My bank in Louisiana had a branch there. I went there, and I wanted to cash. So my credit card didn't work. It did. I went ahead and I showed them my debit card, and I asked them for some, to try and get the cash, and they said, well, you need 2 forms of identity. I said, 2 forms of identity? Well, I have the credit card and I have my passport. Well, no, we've had a lot of problems with fraud, so we need 2 forms of picture ID. I didn't have my driver's license. I had figured, why bring my driver's license when there's a chance I might lose it? I wouldn't need it. I wouldn't drive when I was in Israel and Turkey, so why in the world would I bring it? So I said, no, I don't have it. And I think I burst into tears. Well, it turned out that I had a couple of $100 in traveler's checks with me, which, by the way, this was in 2006. Traveler's checks actually weren't accepted anymore. Pretty much most places I was going to travel anyway. So I cashed them all. I didn't know that then, but I would find it out when I got to Israel. And I cashed in my traveler's checks. Most of my traveler's checks. I didn't cash them all in because I didn't know I wasn't going to be able to use them easily in Israel. So I did cash in most of my traveler's checks. And I went ahead and half of my traveler's checks. And I went back to the airport, went back through security. That's what happened. I went back through the airport, I went back through security. And then I got to my gate. I had about an hour and a half now before boarding time. And I hear an announcement over the intercom. Will Catherine Howell report to the Turkish Air ticket desk? And I said, where is the ticket desk? I asked at the gate. Oh, it's outside security. So I went outside security to the Turkish Air ticket desk thinking, what in the world is wrong? And they tell me, that's when they told me. They told me that they were going to refund my $100 to my credit card because I charged it. And that's what they wanted to tell me. I said, thank you. And now I've got to hurry. I've got to get back to my plane. And I went through the, security one more time. I think the people, I got the same security guy twice. I think he was looking at me funny. And I ended up getting to my plane just in time for boarding. You would think this would be the end of the story, but it's not over yet. This is one of the longest stories I've ever told you, I think. But anyway, when I got on the plane, I saw my seat. I'm coming down the aisle and I see my seat. There is an older woman, a woman about the age of her, it looks like she could be her daughter, and then there's a 2-year-old jumping up and down on the seat, and I'm sitting next to the 2-year-old who's jumping up and down on the seat. It's one of these planes where you have 2, 4, and 2. And I thought, oh my gosh. Well, I got there and I started to put my suitcase in the overhead. And as I began to put it in there, she said, the woman, the younger woman, the mother of this child, said, "This is your seat? Oh, good, 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 good. You change with my husband. He's in the next cabin. We change seats. You change seats. You like his seat. His seat, I'll seat too. You take it." She grabbed my suitcase from me before I had time to talk, and she takes off, and she goes running. She heads for the next cabin, and I'm following behind her. After all, she's got my carry-on suitcase. It's the only thing I have anymore. I don't have any other belongings, and I'm following this woman, and I go straight down, and her husband's over here, and she sees her husband. There he is. And so she climbs across 4 people. She passes the suitcase and climbs across 4 people to get over to where her husband is. I go to the back and go around, and when I get to her husband, get to where she is, she's fussing at her husband, saying, "This one nice lady, she changed seats with you." Pull, pull, pull. And she pulls his suitcase out there. She's shoving my suitcase in the overhead. And she says, "You changed seats?" And he said, "No, I'm fine. I'm settled here." No. You changed seats with this woman." And she said, and he said, No, I'm perfectly all right. And it dawns on me that this man had booked the flight. And what he had done was he'd put his mother or his mother-in-law in, and his wife and the 2-year-old in one cabin, and he'd put himself in the other cabin, and she'd figured it out. And she said, "No, he your son. You help take care of him. No." And she pulled it out, and she grabbed his suitcase, and she took off. And he just wandered on off after her. And this whole commotion was just an uproar in the cabin. So I get in the seat, make sure my suitcase is in the overhead, and close the thing, and I sit down, and there's this nice, mid-60s gentleman sitting next to me, very, suit, just very nice looking man, nice man. And he tells me, "Is this your first trip to Turkey?" And I said, "Yes, it is." He said, I said, "Yes, I've never been to Turkey. I've never been to Turkey." And he goes, well, I think you will like Turkey." He said, "But I want you to know one thing." And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Yes?" And he said, "That woman was not Turkish." Well, it turns out he was a very nice gentleman. He was an engineer. He spoke English beautifully. He'd studied at Oxford and gotten his engineering degree there. And he was just delightful. He was a consulting engineer, apparently. And so he looked at my itinerary for the Turkey part of my trip, and he said, "Oh, yes, these are very nice." And he said, "I even know one of those hotels. I think you'll really like it." And then they served us dinner, and I went to sleep. It was one of those overnight flights, And I was sitting in the aisle seat, and he was sitting next to the window, and I went to sleep. Well, then, all of a sudden, they turn on the lights, and they're coming around with the breakfast, with the meal trays for breakfast. And I wake up, and I look, and I am sitting in the window seat, and he is in the aisle seat. And I said, "What happened?" And he tells me that, well, after we had such a delightful conversation and we ate dinner, you fell asleep. And you must have been very, very tired because you slept very soundly. And he said, and I finally needed to get up and go to the restroom. And he said, "So I tried to wake you up. I called your name. I talked to you, but I did not touch you." He said, I did not touch you. And of course, I didn't know at that time that Muslim men don't touch women who they're not related to. So he said, but I did not touch you. No, no, no. I put on the light. I called the stewardess, and she touched you, and she shook you, and she woke you up and suggested you move to the window seat, and I would stay, and I would take your seat, and that's what we did. And now we'll be in Istanbul in 2 hours, and it's time for. And I was so embarrassed. I was so embarrassed. This gentleman was so nice and so polite. Well, he was pleasant. He made sure that I was pointed out to the proper direction in order to make my connection when we got off the plane at Istanbul, in order for me to make my connection to Israel. Fortunately, there were no other disasters between now and then. I made it to Istanbul. I made it to the gate in Istanbul, even though I did have a connection lag. It was only about an hour. And I made it to Jerusalem, to Tel Aviv International Airport. I made it there at about, it was in the afternoon. And when I stepped off the plane, there was a driver holding my name up on a sign. I was so relieved. The tour guide had arranged for someone to pick me up and drive me the 2-hour drive up to Galilee to this, in order to connect with the rest of the group. It was a very pleasant drive. But by the time we got to Jerusalem, it was just after sunset, and not to Jerusalem, to Galilee. It was just after sunset, and I got to my hotel, and I have to admit, I really didn't get to see. I knew I had a wonderful view, because my hotel room had a nice balcony that looked to the east, to the Sea of Galilee. We were on the east side of the Sea of Galilee, and you could see the Golan Heights, the mountains behind that. And I have to admit, I was so excited that I couldn't wait to actually see the Sea of Galilee. Everybody else had already had a full day of touring. I'd eaten with them in the dining room. Fortunately, I'd come early enough for that. And so I met, and I knew I had my connection. But I was so anxious to see something, So the next morning I was up early, and I had my camera, and I was looking at, and I wanted to see the sunrise, because I knew I was looking to the east. And as the sun came up, I started taking pictures. And I'm going to show you those pictures right now. I remember how I felt as I stood on that balcony in the early dawn, waiting for the sun to come up over the Sea of Galilee. And when the light began to break above the Golan Heights, it was so beautiful, I just had to take a picture. And then a minute later, it got even more beautiful, so I had to take another picture. And then another picture, because the scene just kept growing more and more beautiful. It was wonderful. And then I snapped this picture. Friends, when I saw this picture, it took my breath away. I had felt that God now was giving me a gift for my persistence, that He truly wanted me to take this journey, to make this pilgrimage, to walk in the places where Jesus had walked,
and to be able to share the gospel even more powerfully because of my experience. And of course, the scripture came to mind. Jesus' very last words to us before he ascended into heaven, according to the Gospel of Matthew. Yes, he said the Great Commission, and then right after that, he said, "Remember, I am with you always, even until the end of the age."
As it turned out, the rest of the trip was wonderful. I did feel like God had rewarded me for my persistence. I ended up learning so much on that trip. And at the advice of my seminary professor, and actually the president of my seminary was on that tour too, they suggested that I start leading tours. They felt like I had a gift for it. I have since then I went on to lead about, at least a dozen tours to the Holy Land over the last, it's been probably about 5 years since I've traveled, over the next 10 years. And it has truly been a blessing. Sometimes persistent does indeed. God is rewarded. And I was really blessed. And actually, I came to believe that because I'd encountered nearly every problem someone can have when they're traveling, God was giving me a crash course on how to be a good tour group leader. Until next time, God bless you.